And thanks to everyone for joining. Really appreciate it. Today, I'll be talking about a pretty specific journey in the corporate social impact space, Sama's transition from a nonprofit to a for-profit. But as I was reflecting on this story, it was clear that it's one that touches on broader themes. So this is a journey that really focuses on identity, priorities, and meeting the moment. So hopefully that'll resonate with some of you listening in different ways. So I think to talk about this journey, we really have to start with a little bit of the background of the company. Sama was founded in 2008 on the premise that talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not, and that digital work was a promising way to break down barriers to fair paying jobs. So the vision was always for Sama to be a company. In 2008, though, the concept of a social enterprise was pretty nascent. And so our founder, Leila Jano, was able to find most of her seed funding in venture philanthropy. This idea for investors was still not, quite solidified in the same way. So it was really venture philanthropists that were willing to take the risk on this idea. And over time, the concept and Sama's model continued to grow. The organization started by partnering with local community-based organizations that were based primarily in East Africa, but also in Central America and the Caribbean and South Asia, to connect individuals who faced the greatest barriers to formal employment, whether they were from informal settlements, where there were a lot of biases around getting an entry-level job, or had to forego higher education, by connecting them to digital work. So that was really what Sama was focused on. That was built into our business operations, and we really focused on providing those entry-level opportunities for individuals as the first step, hopefully, in their trajectories to formal employment. Over time, the concept really grew, and actually we were in a great place to kind of catch the wave of responsible businesses and social enterprises. So by 2015, the organization had really established its roots primarily in East Africa and built strong enough relationships and communities to open up its first fully owned and operated delivery center in Nairobi, Kenya. And by 2019, the organization had actually become a profitable nonprofit. We'd had a couple of years of being profitable, and we were ready to make that transition from a nonprofit into a for-profit entity. So when I joined the organization, they were a few months into that transition. And my mandate and the mandate for the impact team was really clear. And that was to ensure that the company, as it evolved, it was going to continue to create positive impact and keep that commitment to having its business practices and operations really embody impact and have it be central to its mission, or central to the business practices. So when I think about the way that we approached this transition, there were kind of three key areas or priorities that the impact team was always keeping in mind. We knew we needed to keep impact mission measurement at the center of what we were doing. So that was always one of our big priorities. We also really needed to take into consideration stakeholder needs and engagement. When I talk about stakeholders here, I'm talking about all stakeholders from our impact workforce, as we call them, so our entry-level workforce, other employees in the organization, our investors, and increasingly an important stakeholder throughout our journey was those who were part of third-party validators and standards organizations too. So keeping all of those priorities in the mix, also our customers, of course. The third priority was really about these emerging ESG priorities. So if you think back to 2019, 2020, I think we were really seeing this boom of ESG at that time, CSR, whatever you want to call it, but really a lot of talk about the role of responsible businesses. And so we were really trying to keep that evolving conversation as part of our overall set of priorities. I know sometimes with the traditional Venn diagram, you're really thinking about the center where all these things converge. But in our journey, I think what we found is that it was really about what do we need to prioritize at the specific moment in our journey. So, there would be times where as you'll see as we talk through these this diagram in different points in time, There was really different points in our journey where we were focused really heavily on one of these different pieces, and it was more about understanding how the other priorities intersected with them. So after, a couple months of kind of getting ramped up in 2019, Sama was thrown into this period where we were really e- everyone was really starting to question kind of how is impact going to live and exist with business. So for all businesses, I think there was some form of really recognizing this was not business as usual. Of course, we were in the midst of a global pandemic. The way that, like many businesses, took a big toll on the way that Sama ran its business. We had to do some quick changes to our operations and the way things were done. But thinking about how the impact was going to play out as we made those transitions was certainly on a lot of people's minds. Also, in early 2020, our founder, Laila Jana, passed away from a rare form of cancer. So she was really the primary conduit for making that case um, for impact and business and how they married each other. So as we were thinking about all of these transitions, we had to figure out how do we carry on this legacy in her absence and what does it mean for the organization? We were also trying to figure out, scale going to look like. So during this period, we were very heavily pursuing new fundraising avenues. We had a big Series B that was completed in 2021. And we were trying to kind of balance some of our old priorities from our time as a nonprofit, including wrapping up a randomized control trial in collaboration with MIT that was set to show the cause and effect relationship between Sama's impact model and the outcomes that we hope to see related to income generation and job opportunities after leaving the company. So there was a lot going on in 2020 and 2021. It kind of felt like the slide. There was just kind of a mess and a lot of different pieces all at once. And so really with the impact team, our our mission at this point was figure out like how do we bring a little bit of clarity to that impact mission, make sure it continues on. So when I think back to our priorities, we knew all these different pieces were going on, all these things were happening in the company, but our focus is really on impact, mission, and measurement. As an organization, we had this really great opportunity to think not only about conveying our impact mission, the concept of it, but to have it really be backed up by the numbers. We were brought into a really strong tradition of measuring Sama's impact. And at this juncture, when there were a lot of questions about where are we going, are we going to continue with our mission, how are we doing it? What our team thought would be the most important thing that we could do that was in our control was to really focus on making sure the numbers related to impact were strong and they were being consistently shared. We also, because impact was built into the operating model already, we were able to work with some of our other teams to make sure that the data that was being collected and managed by those other teams included an impact lens. We did have to, of course, make sure that there was no ways that there could be any biases that would negatively kind of connect the two, but it was very important that we had them side by side so that whenever we were talking about our business metrics, impact was part of that conversation. This is one of the ways that we showed that, in addition to having it be things we were looking at internally, we wanted to make sure that it was available to our different audiences externally. So I know this one's from 2022, but back in 2021, we started publishing what we called Impact by the Numbers. So this was a quarterly document where we were sharing what our impact looked like on a quarterly basis. On the top part of the form, you see kind of our key impact metrics that included the total number of impacted since we started as an organization, and then kind of the three groups that we broke down for our impact, which included our workers, those who benefited from the incomes earned by workers as dependents in households, and then also those who were trained by the organization. We also tried to make the organization or give the organization an opportunity to understand a little bit more about all the different data that we were looking at as an impact team. So, as part of something like Impact by the Numbers, we would also share different data each quarter that would dig a little bit deeper into what impact was and how we were thinking about it by the numbers. But at this juncture, when there was so much going on, what was really most important to us was making sure that we could both talk about why impact was important to the organization, how we were doing it, but we could also show it very clearly through the data. As we moved into 2022 and 2023, we felt like we had a pretty solid foundation with our impact mission and our measurement systems. These, especially the measurement systems, were really integrated. We had built them in, and we're kind of able to report on them on a regular cadence. And so we felt like at this juncture, we were able to shift the organization's priorities, the impact team's priorities, to focus a little bit more on making the case for building more ESG priorities into our business. It was something that was happening the whole time, especially if you think about these three different pieces. We had stakeholders who were asking about, like, what was our climate action plan? How are we thinking about our, governance practices in different ways? But it wasn't something that we'd really socialized with the organization in a broader way. And this was the perfect opportunity to do it. So we chose to do this by really going on, I guess, what I would call a roadshow. So my team and I focused on just getting communications out internally and externally at every opportunity we could. So we were chugging along, doing things like measuring our carbon footprint, starting to build up, new sets of policies that demonstrated our good governance practices. But how are we really making that case, and who knew about it? So we used every opportunity we could to really get that messaging out there. And we also worked to make sure that the organization recognized that some of the things that were already built into our existing practices were actually linked to ESG, and they weren't things that lived within the impact team. They actually lived within the organization and other places. So one of the ways we did that was through an impact spotlight. This was a monthly, I would say you could call it a newsletter, you could call it any sort of publication that we sent out through various internal channels, where we would highlight one element of Sama's work. Sometimes it was something that was largely driven by the impact team. Other times it was driven by another team, but it was really an opportunity for us to make this connection of all the different ways that the organization was engaging with ESG. We also, used any opportunity we were given, whether it be an all hands meeting or a smaller conversation with maybe one department, to talk about some of the work that Sama was doing, and our impact team was doing, related to like our climate action plan and why that was important overall. We also started doing what we called quarterly impact hours. This was just 1 hour that was set aside. Anyone from the organization could join, and the impact team walked through kind of one specific topic related to impact in depth. And these were great opportunities because we were able to sort of highlight all the other things we were doing. We recognized that people were really going to react and engage with materials in different ways and at a time that made sense for them. So for some, that impact hour was like the 1 hour each quarter when they could come together and really focus on impact. But they could also see, oh yeah, we also publish these impact spotlights, or we, shared this information about another piece of our work at another point. So they were able to get all the information there. Um, One of the things for those impact hours that was particularly helpful is we could go into more depth about what we were doing. So as we were really thinking about what our transition looked like, we tried to use every opportunity, including the impact hours, to share that with our teams. So this is actually a slide. I know there's a lot on here, but this is a slide we actually used during one of our impact hours to talk about the journey of where we'd been and where we were going as an impact focused organization. So what's above the line here is just this journey with the Millennium Development Goals and this concept of work as an alternative to traditional philanthropy or aid. Those were kind of early grounding concepts in Sama's impact trajectory, and then transitioning to the sustainable development goals that were much more integrated, and then moving into kind of ESG and this concept of stakeholder capitalism. That was a big part of kind of where we were going. And then on the bottom of the line, it was really about who we were, what we were doing, how we were measuring our impact, and trying to kind of make the case for why at this particular juncture and with everything that was going on in the world of ESG, was it our time to do these things in a different way. So this is just kind of another way that we really used our messaging to meet the moment. As I mentioned, walking through that last slide, we talked a lot about where we started, made sure we were grounded in what we were doing and why that was core to who we were. But we also talked a lot about where we were heading. One of the strong anchors for us in this process was using new standards that were important to us. So in 2020, Sama had actually become a certified B Corporation. If you're not familiar with B Corp, it is a certifying body that looks at various elements of an organization to determine that you're making a positive impact on stakeholders beyond your shareholders. That was a really important anchor for us. And I think one of the things we talked about in this journey of where we started to where we're heading was that as a B Corp, our new challenge was to create a successful business that balanced profit and stakeholder needs, and that our decisions in service of our stakeholders, we had to continue to show that they were having a positive impact. So really, we used all of these opportunities to talk about the different ways that we were really kind of moving our vision forward. By 2023, I would say we were at this point where we talked about it a lot. We'd used every avenue. I talked a lot about kind of the written communications and the impact hour. We were also doing smaller groups, talking with different departments, doing like ask me anythings and whatnot to make sure that those connections to impact were very clearly understood and felt by members of our team across the organization. But by 2023, we'd done a lot of talking. The work was mostly going on in the background. We were ready to really push it to the forefront. So we decided to set a few organization-wide impact-related goals. We set one related to ESG. That was really focused on ESG excellence and was an opportunity for us to amplify and call in individuals across the organization to the work that the impact team had started, specifically related to climate action, to build on our responsible governance practices, and to really amplify our social impact. The other was to deepen our social impact mission. So while in 2020 and 2021, we were very focused on kind of a stay the course, make sure that we're continuing to carry out our impact mission, we thought this was the right juncture to really think about what was our next move related to social impact and how we were going to broaden that and really expand on it in a way that was unique to the organization. So we did a lot of our focus during this period when we were talking about ESG. We were making the case for how it was really a part of the organization and how we were building out our new ESG identity. A lot of that was internal. But one of the things we knew was really important is that our external messaging looked exactly, it mirrored what we were doing internally. So we were consistent, and for stakeholders beyond those within kind of our closest ecosystem, they were getting the same message. For us, one of the best places to do that was in our annual impact report. In 2022, I guess this was in 2023, on our 2022 information, we decided to do a pretty significant overhaul of our impact reports. In the past, we'd really done them as nonprofit organizations, which look a little bit different, but we use this 2022 report as the opportunity to tell our full story. And one of the things that came through really strongly in this report was our why. I mentioned that one of the things we'd done, in addition to our larger impact hours and some of our written publications, was doing kind of like smaller group discussions to talk about impact with different departments. And those were really great testing grounds for like what part of our impact mission is resonating and where is there confusion. And I think one of the things we got through those conversations was some questions about our why as it related to the E and the G of ESG. You know, the organization, Sama had a really strong impact mission. We'd proven it through an RCT, through our ongoing impact measurement. Why were we like in the midst of all of these different things happening with the organization? Why were we diverting our focus from that central mission and thinking about these other things? And so in the impact report, after having those discussions, kind of building out our story, this is the place where we were able to really talk through why we were really expanding that vision, why it was important. So we planted the seeds in this report. For example, when we talked about our climate action process, it wasn't that, or climate action strategy, it wasn't that we were just doing it for the sake of meeting customer requirements or checking a box. We were doing it because climate action had the potential to create new jobs, which was central to our mission. Climate action was affecting the communities that we cared about most. And we were going to be agents in making positive impact for those we cared about in different ways. So this was really kind of the place where we were able to bring a lot of the different pieces together that we talked about, and not just talk about what we were doing, but why it was so important to our identity and who we were. So by 2023, we'd really laid a lot of this groundwork. The impact team itself felt like we had a really strong uh, foundation in our impact measurement, in our, making sure that the organization felt strong and how we were carrying out our impact mission. We'd introduced lots of new ESG priorities. We felt like it was the time for us to think more about how we as a team could start to transfer more of the responsibility and accountability related to ESG to other parts of the organization. We were lucky in that since one of the big draws to Sama has always been the impact mission. We had lots of champions across the organization who cared about impact, who cared about being a responsible business. And at this juncture, we kind of made the case that others were already supporting that mission, but how could we really get them involved and make sure that they were taking on more of the work? Um, the reason we were doing this was multi layered. One, of course, was because we wanted them to continue to feel that commitment. Another was that we needed support from our colleagues. There were a lot of these things that were integrated deeply into our operations. And so we'd already been working with them, and we wanted to formalize some of those relationships and shift accountability. And then also, what we'd hoped is that there were places, or what we saw was that there were places in the organization where there were opportunities for different departments to really own the work, and it made more sense, and it would allow our team to have a little time and space to focus more on furthering our impact mission. So, although we'd done what we felt like was a lot of the ground laying work related to ESG, our first step in really directly engaging other team members and continuing to build impact into our operations was to do an ESG awareness campaign that was very targeted to different audiences and different departments. These are a couple of the modules that were created by some of my colleagues to further introduce our colleagues in other departments to ESG. This, much more than the previous work, was really tactical. And how do what does it mean for you in your role? So we really went from this big picture of here's why it's important, this is what we're doing, to like, here's actually how it's done. And so we went through another roadshow. We talked to different teams. We did these different trainings, and then really worked with different teams to figure out how we could build different parts of our overall ESG strategy into their existing workloads and their practices as a department. This is just one example of how, we sort of dispersed some of the responsibilities. This is an exhaustive list, but we went through a process of really trying to identify what would be important or where it would fit into different teams' work to support some of this. I think with our sustainability work and particularly our climate action work, it was really clear that the finance and procurement departments were really helpful in doing carbon footprint accounting. But then we also saw where there were opportunities for like our engineering teams and our security and facilities teams to be involved. For social, we had always had a really close relationship with our people team, but we saw some other opportunities with procurement, with global project operations, and some other teams. And then governance, I think some of these were clear. We'd already been working really closely with legal and people operations, IT, and whatnot. But through this process of creating more awareness around ESG that was targeted to different teams and really shifting accountability, we were really able to ingrain ESG and these impact concepts into the organization in a much more concrete way. So, with all this in mind, thinking about the lessons learned from this process, some of the things that I think really resonated with me and when I reflect on the journey, one was that we really needed to communicate proactively. At every stage, there was a lot of work that went on behind the scenes where the impact team was driving different efforts. We were really thinking about those three groups. We were thinking about our impact mission. We were thinking about our stakeholders. We were thinking about ESG trends. But what did we need to communicate to key stakeholders at what moment to make sure they were being brought along on the journey? As part of our communications, we were also committed to not doing it perfectly, but doing it often. For us, it really made sense to just get the message out there, make sure that the message was clear, tweak the message as we heard feedback, and think about what were the touch points that were really going to solidify the message. So for us, it was that impact report as an opportunity to do it, but not getting stuck along the way and having it be too perfect before we got it out into the world. Another thing that was really important to us was always connecting to our why. I know this is something that a lot of organizations do. It can play out in a lot of different ways, but having our impact mission and really focusing on that at the beginning and getting some of the basics down related to that impact mission in a really solid way allowed us to build over time. So if we hadn't had our impact measurement systems in place, if we weren't able to demonstrate impact on an ongoing basis and have that be kind of the thing that just continued on, talking about ESG, talking about stakeholder engagement in different ways wouldn't have been possible. And finally, as we were making that transition in 2023 through the present, we actually got to thinking about our offboarding plan, which is not something I think happens very often in the impact space because we're used to doing a lot of the work alone and by driving things be that might be in addition to business needs. But I think what we really tried to do is figure out how can we best integrate this and where does it make the most sense? And a lot of times it didn't make sense for our team to be the one driving it. We could make sure that it was happening and make the case for it. But when it actually got down to integration, we weren't the team to do it. We were the team to kind of create the connection or show that there was a connection. So creating that offboarding plan and making sure that we really ushered a transition into having others in the organization take over some of the responsibilities was really important to us. All right. I've talked a lot. Hopefully, I shared a couple nuggets that might be helpful or might resonate, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has. Yeah, so if there's anything, I'm happy to answer.
Awesome. Kristen, thank you so much. What a fascinating journey. It's not every day you hear a nonprofit going to a for-profit and then still maintaining everything impact related. So awesome, awesome job. We do have a question from the audience, and this question is from Wade. It's a kind of a three-part question, so I'll break it apart. The first part of the question is, where did your team fit in the org chart?
Yeah, so we moved a bit. The organization again was in like a I didn't talk too much about it because there were so many different ways this conversation could have gone, but the organization was evolving quite a bit throughout this time. So at one point in the journey, we were nestled under our strategy team, our strategic partnerships and strategy team, and then we ultimately landed under our CFO. So it was kind of part of the overall operation structure, but I reported to our CFO, and we found that we were able to do a lot with that structure, in part because there was always the conversation of kind of the finances along with the impact and how do you marry the two. I think one of the things that I really appreciated our CFO saying was that he took on kind of a broader role of chief risk officer, if that makes sense. So thinking really about his role of like what are risks and opportunities in the organization. So I think that helped us. We were able to have those conversations and think about impact um, with that lens.
The next part of the question, what teams were your biggest allies?
Yeah. Um, I would say given the impact mission and the fact that we had this commitment to providing entry level work opportunities for individuals. And that was really our most direct impact. We worked a lot with our people team. So, the L&D people operations were really involved with actual hiring processes and then some of the early data collection related to our workforce. So they were some of our biggest allies. And then I think as we were transitioning into more of an ESG focus, when we were thinking about our governance practices and whatnot, they were also a huge ally. Um, we again, I think finance just because which is not the most likely partnership, but I think given our org structure and the fact that I was reporting directly to our CFO, made them very much an ally. Um, Although I didn't talk about it much, we also had this kind of strand where the organization transitioned from an LLC to a public benefit corporation. That was part of our B Corp requirements. And so our legal team became a really strong ally when we were working with our board on kind of socializing that transition. They were some of the people we talked with the most.
And the last part of the question is, which teams were slow to embrace, if any?
That's a good question. So I think again, because the organization always had an impact mission, it did draw a lot of individuals who wanted to contribute to that mission. I would say not so much that there were teams that were reluctant, but they didn't see the connection quite as clearly. So when it came to like our engineering teams, product teams, they were often working with our entry level workforce in a different way. I think that their focus was a lot of times on like, how do we optimize this for our customers or how do we like monetize this piece? And so making the connection, figuring out like how through your work, what's the piece that's related to impact and supporting our impact workforce. That was a little harder to make at first, or maybe they didn't see it. I think the impact team had to work harder to kind of make those connections um, to kind of amplify where those synergies were.
And I suspect your comms strategy probably helped in terms of keeping everyone in the know and whatnot.
Yeah, and we do, our engineering and product teams, we had a huge advocate in their leadership, or their leader, their VP. Those smaller kind of targeted sessions worked particularly well with our technical teams because their situation was a little bit different. They asked some tough questions. I could say it was great. I think that they really challenged some things because they were seeing. The other thing we didn't really talk about is what Sama does as a company, but we are providing the training data to build AI models and LLMs. So it was a really fast evolving field. There's a lot of uncertainty in it. And I think our engineering teams were seeing a lot of that uncertainty and trying to figure out, like, how do we, if we're looking 3 steps ahead, what is it going to mean for our impact and whatnot? So those smaller sessions that we had with them were really important in making sure that we were able to make those connections and um, make sure that there was make sure that they could see where impact aligned with their work.
And when it comes to communications, was there one channel or format that worked better than the others, or was it more so just a collection of different channels that you were all working with that's what made the strategy work?
Yeah, I do think it was some of the parts, because people have just different ways of engaging with content. I think some people really like the written content where they could go into it and read when they wanted to. I think when other people open up like a 2-page document that has nothing to do with what they have to get done in the next 2 hours, they're like, no, thank you. So, yeah, I think it was the sum of the parts. The impact hours were really great because it allowed us to go deep into the content. I think that our intention with some of the other formats was like get out a little bit of information. Maybe someone will read it this month, but they might not read it 2 months, for the next 2 months. And so they'll get this one little tidbit. But with the impact hour, we were able to do those longer form conversations. We were able to engage some of our current and former members of our workforce. I think we were able to do like in-depth conversations with them. We had some like alums come back and talk with the organization about what they were doing, so we could really see impact in kind of its long form, which was really exciting. So yeah, I think that format, when it came to being able to expand on the story, was one of the most effective.
For the impact hour sessions, did you have any difficulties getting people to attend at all? And if so, what were some of the ways that you were able to get folks to attend, i.e., maybe it was mandatory? You had to join at least one impact hour session every year or something like that.
Yeah. So we typically had pretty good turnout. In a global company, I think it's always hard to find hours that work for everyone. And we did them as live sessions. They weren't recorded or anything like that. So um, what we found is just given the different time zones of the organization, there are like 3 hours of the day where everyone wants to have meetings with each other. So if we put it in that time, it was a little harder to just get people to have the time to do it. Um, I actually think that those smaller, like ask me anything sessions with departments was really helpful because we could sort of give the teasers then, where we'll talk about this during the AMA, but if you really want to hear a lot more, it's this, impact hour where it's coming up. We were able to use all hands meetings as teasers too, where maybe you get 5 minutes during an all hands meeting, but then you can, expand on that at the impact hour. So I think um, there was interest. One of the biggest barriers was just finding a time that works for people to join.
Something I want to go back to really quick. So when you joined Sama, you joined during the transition, going from nonprofit to for profit. Was there any concern about what that would mean for the kind of the greater mission? Or was it that since
Mhm.
the founder always wanted to, be a business and had that in kind of intentionality going into it, that everyone knew that this was coming?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a rub every day, to be honest. Like
Mhm.
it's just built into there. At times there are just different objectives when it comes to business and impact. There's different timelines for realizing things. I think I come from a measurement background, and one of the key pieces of socialization when it came to impact measurement was like, you're going to see impact, but it might be 6 months after you do something, and that's still a short period. And in business, I don't think that's quite how it works as often. So, yeah, it was a constant rub. And I think that we were very intentional about putting in some guardrails early on to ensure that there were those checks. I do actually think the org structure was one of them, like having the impact team report into the CFO was intentional in that way that it always made the conversation be about the finances and the impact side by side. Um, We also, as part of the transition to a public benefit corporation, we changed our company bylaws so that there was a commitment to creating positive impact for stakeholders beyond your shareholders. That's built into the company's bylaws. And part of that is weighing major business decisions. What's the impacts of those on different stakeholders? So that was really ingrained, and I think relying on a third party as being the ones to bring in that structure was really helpful.
And you mentioned something I think is really important to underscore, that impact can take a long time to kind of materialize. And then when you're in the business world, everyone wants results yesterday.
Right,
So
right.
how do you, from your experience, how do you find that sweet spot between getting stakeholders to understand that what we're doing now is going to have a long-term impact versus it's going to, happen tomorrow? How do you find that balance so they understand that, okay, this isn't going to happen tomorrow or the next day? It could be a month, 3 months, a year, 2 years, 10 years from now.
Yeah. So I think first off, we did have to find a balance between the things that we could measure quickly and what we could measure long term. So I think a lot of times like number reached is one of the first early indicators that you can use in the impact space to understand like at least what you're doing, is it reaching the right people. But we really relied on, I'd say, some things that more traditionally come from the nonprofit world. So our organization was really open to the concept of like a theory of change. So having that as our foundation and being able to lay out like, here's the milestone we think is we're going to see, but we could actually timestamp it or make sure that awareness was there up front. That was really kind of I'd say the framework that helped us make that case. Um, Also, because the organization had a history going into being a business of impact measurement, we were able, like, for example, through the RCT that we were conducting, that was well underway by the time we made the transition. So we did have data over the course of several years to show that, and we were able to kind of incubate that while we were still a nonprofit. So building on that, we still are really challenged, especially when we think about we'd love to be able to better measure outcomes post SAMA. So, with our trajectory, it's really entry level jobs that someone can commit to supporting its team members in. We've been doing more work to support them in their trajectories after they leave the organization, but just getting that information and being able to track people for 5, 10 years after they've left the company is really challenging. So it's still a work in progress, but I think that the theory of change has helped us to show that it is. It just takes that long.